The crystalline spires of Station Helios caught the light of the distant sun, casting prismatic shadows across the medical bay where Dr. Vivian Reed stood organizing her samples. The station, humanity's pride in the Outer Rim, served as a crucial waypoint between Earth and the mysterious Astrian Empire. After 5 years as the station's lead xenobiologist, Vivian had grown accustomed to the strange and wonderful variety of alien life that passed through her lab. But nothing had prepared her for what was about to unfold. The emergency alert pierced the quiet of her lab, its urgent tone sending a chill down her spine. Priority 1 medical emergency. Royal clearance. Quarantine protocols in effect. Vivian's hands stilled over her microscope. Royal clearance meant Astrians, the enigmatic crystalline beings who ruled the largest empire in known space. In 5 years, she'd never seen one in person. The medical bay doors slid open with a hiss, admitting a procession of towering figures. Their bodies seemed to be carved from living crystal, with faceted surfaces that shifted colors with each movement. Leading them was Commander Nixus, his crystalline form a deep purple that spoke of his military rank. Dr. Reed, his voice resonated like wind through crystal. We require your expertise. The situation is delicate. Behind him, floating on a gravity stretcher, lay a figure that made Vivian's breath catch. Unlike the other's angular forms, this Astrian's crystal structure flowed like liquid starlight, with patterns that seemed to dance beneath the surface. But the beauty was marred by dark veins spreading through the crystalline flesh. This is Princess Thera, Nixus announced. Heir to the Astrian throne. And she is dying. Vivian moved immediately to the stretcher, medical scanner in hand. What happened? Unknown. The deterioration began 3 standard days ago. Our healers are ineffective. The admission seemed to pain him. You are known for understanding biological systems our kind cannot comprehend. Vivian studied the readings on her scanner, frowning at the complex patterns. Astrian biology was unlike anything in the galaxy, part crystal, part energy, part something science still couldn't define. The dark veins were spreading through Thera's crystal matrix like cracks in glass. These patterns, Vivian murmured, they're not random. This isn't a natural deterioration. She looked up at Nixus sharply. Someone did this to her. The commander's crystalline form darkened. You are certain? The spread pattern is too precise, too calculated. This is engineered. Vivian was already moving to her lab station, mind racing through possibilities. I need complete access to all Astrian medical records about their royal line's biological structure. That is forbidden. Then she dies. Vivian's voice was firm. I can't help her if I'm working blind. A soft chime emanated from the princess, their equivalent of a pained moan. The dark veins pulsed, spreading further. Nixus's form shifted colors rapidly, their version of internal conflict. Finally, he placed a crystalline hand on a nearby console. You have access. But know this, if she dies, the consequences will reach far beyond this station. Vivian was already immersed in the data flooding her screens. She won't die. Not on my watch. Hours melted away as Vivian worked, analyzing the strange patterns of corruption spreading through Thera's crystal matrix. The princess's condition continued to deteriorate, the dark veins now covering nearly a third of her form. The other Astrians stood like statues, their crystalline bodies humming with barely contained tension. A pattern began to emerge from Vivian's analysis, something that shouldn't be possible. The toxin, she said aloud, it's not just attacking her structure. It's rewriting it. Changing the fundamental patterns of her crystal matrix. She pulled up a simulation showing the progression. See these patterns? They're not random corruption. They're trying to force her body to reject its own royal lineage markers. Nixus moved closer, his crystal form pulsing with concern. Impossible. The royal pattern is immutable. Not anymore. Vivian's fingers flew over her console. Someone found a way to target the very thing that makes her royal. But why? Why not just kill her outright? A soft chiming sound came from Thera, weaker now, but distinct. To Vivian's surprise, her universal translator activated. Because, death would make me a martyr. The princess's voice was like wind through crystal chimes. Removing my royal status would just make me unworthy. Vivian turned to the stretcher, where Thera's eyes, swirling pools of starlight, had opened. Don't try to move, Your Highness. The toxin is still spreading. You are different from what I expected, Dr. Reed. Thera's form rippled with pain. They said humans were primitive, incapable of understanding our nature. Well, they got the primitive part right, Vivian smiled grimly. But sometimes simple solutions work best. She turned back to her console. The toxin is complex, but its goal is simple: break down your royal pattern. So maybe. Her fingers danced across the controls as she fed data into the simulation. If we can't stop it from changing you, maybe we can control how it changes you. Guide the transformation instead of fighting it. Nixis stepped forward. You would risk changing her very nature? She's going to change either way, Vivian countered. This way, we choose how. She looked at Thera. But it has to be your choice, Your Highness. I think I can save your life, but you won't be exactly the same afterward. Your crystal matrix will be evolved. Thera's form pulsed with a weak light. The ones who did this, they believe our empire must never change. That tradition is everything. Her voice grew stronger. Perhaps it is time for change. Commander, Vivian turned to Nixis, I need your help. Your crystal resonance can help guide the transformation. Will you assist? The commander's form shifted through multiple colors before settling on a deep, determined blue. What must I do? As Vivian explained her plan, she caught Thera watching her with those starlight eyes. There was something in that gaze, a recognition, perhaps, or a decision being made. Whatever came next, Vivian knew that this moment would change not just one life, but the future of human-Astrian relations forever. She just hoped she was right about how to save the princess who now trusted her with not just her life, but her very nature. The next 48 hours in Station Helios's medical bay became a desperate race against time. Vivian worked tirelessly, her lab transformed into a glittering arena where science battled tradition. Princess Thera's crystalline form lay suspended in a containment field, dark veins now covering half her body, while sophisticated sensors monitored every fluctuation in her crystal matrix. The transformation is accelerating, Vivian announced, studying the holographic displays surrounding her workstation. But we're starting to understand its pattern. She gestured to Commander Nixis, who stood nearby like a purple sentinel. Look at these resonance frequencies. The toxin isn't just attacking her royal markers, it's trying to rewrite them into something specific. Nixis moved closer, his crystalline form humming with concern. Explain. It's like. Vivian searched for an analogy the Astrians would understand. Like trying to reshape a crystal structure, but with a template in mind. Whoever designed this wasn't just trying to destroy the princess's royal status, they were trying to change her into something else entirely. A weak chime emanated from Thera's containment field. The ancient form, she whispered, her voice barely audible through the translator. They wish to return me to what we once were. Vivian turned sharply. What do you mean? Before Thera could answer, the medical bay's security systems flashed red. Unauthorized access detected in the Royal Medical Database, the station's AI announced. Remote infiltration attempt in progress. Lock down all systems. Vivian commanded, fingers flying across her console. Isolate the medical bay network. But the attack was sophisticated, boring through their defenses with frightening precision. As Vivian fought to protect their research data, patterns in the cyber assault caught her attention. They seemed familiar somehow. "These codes," she muttered, "they're using Astrian encryption patterns. But not just any patterns, royal ones." Nixus's form darkened to a deep indigo. "Impossible. Only the imperial family has access to those codes." "Exactly." Vivian's voice was grim. "Someone in the royal court doesn't want us to cure her. They want her to complete the transformation they started." The revelation hung in the air like a crystal about to shatter. Thurah's form pulsed weakly, but her voice carried steel. "My own family, of course. The signs were always there." Working frantically, Vivian managed to isolate their most critical systems, but not before the attackers extracted some of their research data. As the security alerts faded, she turned to face the others. "We need to understand what we're really dealing with." "Your Highness, what did you mean by ancient form?" Thurah's crystalline surface rippled, patterns shifting beneath like thoughts made visible. "It is not something we speak of, but you have earned the truth. Before we were the Astrian Empire, before we learned to shape our crystal forms into these refined structures, our ancestors were different. More primal. More powerful in some ways, but harder to control. The primordial crystal forms," Nixus added, his tone reverent and fearful at once. "It is said they could reshape reality itself, but the cost was chaos. Our current forms, our civilization, was built on bringing order to that chaos. And now someone wants to force you back to that state," Vivian mused, mind racing. "But why? And why you specifically?" "Because I was already different," Thurah's voice carried a hint of bitter amusement. "My crystal patterns never fully conformed to the royal standard. Too fluid. Too adaptable. Some saw it as a flaw, a sign I was unfit to rule. Now they seek to prove it." Vivian studied her readings with renewed understanding. "That's why you're still alive when others might have been killed by this toxin. Your natural adaptability is actually helping you survive the transformation." She paused, an idea forming. "And maybe that's how we save you." Moving to her console, Vivian pulled up complex crystal structure diagrams. "Instead of fighting the transformation entirely, we guide it. Use your natural adaptability to create something new, neither fully ancient form nor current royal pattern, but a bridge between them." "That would be heresy," Nixus protested, but without much conviction. "It would be evolution," Thurah countered, her voice stronger. "Our empire has stagnated, Commander. Perhaps this is the universe's way of forcing us to remember our roots while finding a new path forward." As they discussed the implications, Vivian's sensors detected something extraordinary. The dark veins in Thurah's crystal matrix were changing, the patterns becoming more intricate, more purposeful. Instead of corruption, they began to look like new growth, like frost patterns spreading across a window. "It's already happening," Vivian breathed, watching the readings. "Your body is naturally trying to find a balance between the old and new forms. We just need to help it along." She turned to Nixus. "Commander, I'll need you to use your resonance abilities again, but this time, we're not fighting the change. We're guiding it." The commander's form shifted through several colors before settling on a determined azure. "What you suggest goes against thousands of years of tradition. Traditions that someone in your royal court is willing to kill to protect," Vivian reminded him. "Sometimes holding too tightly to the past means strangling the future." A soft harmonic tone drew their attention back to Thurah. The dark veins across her form had begun to glow with an inner light, creating patterns that were both beautiful and alien. "I trust you, Dr. Reed," she said. "And I choose evolution over extinction." As Vivian began calibrating her equipment for the delicate procedure ahead, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in Thurah's crystalline surface. The human scientist and the alien princess, both prepared to challenge the natural order of things. In that moment, she understood that they weren't just fighting to save one life, they were about to change the course of an empire. What she didn't yet realize was how many powerful figures would do anything to stop them. The medical bay of Station Helios had become a battlefield of light and crystal. Vivian stood at her console, directing streams of carefully calibrated energy into Princess Thera's transforming body. The dark veins had evolved into luminescent patterns that pulsed with their own rhythm, neither fully ancient nor modern Astrian. Energy harmonics holding steady, Vivian announced, her voice tense with concentration. Commander Nixus, ready for the next resonance pulse. The commander's crystalline form vibrated at precisely the frequency they had calculated, sending waves of purple energy through Thera's changing matrix. But before they could complete the sequence, the medical bay's communications system crackled to life. Station Helios, this is the Imperial vessel Crown of Stars, a voice rang out, its tone carrying the unmistakable authority of the Astrian royal court. We demand immediate access to the medical bay. Vivian's heart sank as she recognized the voice from official broadcasts, High Chancellor Rodrix, the most powerful figure in the Empire after the royal family itself. Nixus's form darkened with concern. The High Chancellor rarely leaves the Imperial capital, he said. Something is very wrong. The medical bay doors slid open despite the lockdown, admitting a procession of crystalline figures even more ornate than Nixus's guard. At their head strode High Chancellor Rodrix, his form an intricate lattice of gold and silver patterns that seemed to capture and redirect light itself. Dr. Reed, Rodrix's voice was like crystal being crushed. You will cease this unauthorized experimentation immediately. The princess requires proper Astrian care. Vivian stood her ground. With all due respect, Chancellor, proper Astrian care failed her. We're in the middle of a delicate procedure that cannot be interrupted. You dare to lecture me on Astrian matters? Rodrix moved closer, his form towering over her. I have guided the Empire's development for 3 centuries. I will not allow some human scientist to corrupt our royal line with her primitive methods. But as he spoke, Vivian noticed something in his crystal patterns, a familiar resonance. She had seen it before, in the code that had attacked their systems. Her eyes widened with understanding. It was you, she said softly. You engineered the toxin. You tried to force her transformation. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Rodrix's form pulsed with dangerous energy. You understand nothing. The royal line must remain pure, unchanged. When Princess Thera began exhibiting signs of natural evolution, she became a threat to everything we have built. You mean everything you have controlled, Thera's voice rang out, stronger than it had been in days. Her containment field rippled as she pushed herself upright, her new patterns glowing with increasing intensity. I've seen the ancient records you tried to suppress, Chancellor. Our people weren't meant to be static crystals, unchanging for eternity. We were meant to grow, to evolve. Dangerous talk, Rodrix's form shifted to a threatening red. The kind of talk that led to your unfortunate condition. The kind of truth you tried to bury, Vivian countered, her fingers moving discreetly across her console. Along with how many others who showed signs of evolution. The High Chancellor's guard moved forward, weapons materializing from their crystalline forms. But Nixus and his soldiers stood firm, creating a protective barrier around Thera's containment field. Think carefully about your next move, Chancellor, Nixus warned. The Empire might be interested to learn how many of their traditions are actually your manipulations. Rodrix's laugh was like breaking glass. You think the Empire will believe you? A rebellious princess, a human scientist, and a handful of guards? I am the voice of tradition, the guardian of our way of life. And that's exactly why you'll fail, Vivian said, pressing a final command into her console. Because you don't understand what tradition really means. It's not about preventing change, it's about carrying forward what's truly valuable while letting go of what no longer serves. The containment field around Thera suddenly pulsed with brilliant light. The princess's form began to shift, her patterns rearranging themselves in ways that made Roderick step back in shock. She was becoming something new, a harmony of ancient power and modern refinement. "What have you done?" Roderick demanded. "I helped her become what she was always meant to be," Vivian answered. "What your fear tried to prevent." Thera rose from the containment field, her new form radiating power that made even Roderick's guards step back. Her voice resonated through the room like a crystal symphony. "You tried to use our ancient forms against me, Chancellor. But you forgot their true nature. They weren't tools of destruction, they were instruments of change." The princess raised her hand, and the very light in the room seemed to bend around her. "I am neither what you feared nor what you tried to force me to become. I am what our people have always been capable of, evolution without loss, change without destruction." Roderick's form vibrated with rage and fear. "This is impossible. The transformative protocols in the toxin were designed to be irreversible, to reduce you to a primitive state." "Thank you for that confession, Chancellor," Nixus said coldly, as hidden recorders in his armor captured every word. "I'm sure the Imperial Court will find it most interesting." But Roderick wasn't finished. With a motion like shattering glass, he signaled his guards. "Take them. The princess is clearly corrupted. This human has twisted her mind along with her form." What happened next would be debated in the Empire for centuries to come. As Roderick's guards moved to attack, Thera's new form began to sing, there was no other word for it. The sound rippled through the medical bay like liquid starlight, and every crystalline being it touched began to resonate in response. The guards stopped, their forms vibrating with recognition of something ancient and true. Even Roderick stumbled, his carefully maintained form showing cracks in its perfect facade. "You see, Chancellor?" Thera's voice was almost gentle. "You cannot stop evolution. You can only choose whether to embrace it or be left behind by it." As if to punctuate her words, alarms began blaring throughout Station Helios. Multiple Astrian warships detected dropping out of hyperspace, the station's AI announced. "Imperial signatures confirmed." Vivian looked at her readouts and smiled. "Right on schedule," she said. "Did I mention I sent a priority message to your mother, Your Highness?" The Empress seemed very interested to hear about recent events in her court. The look of utter shock on Roderick's crystalline face was almost worth all the danger they had faced. Almost. Station Helios shuddered as more Imperial ships emerged from hyperspace, their crystalline hulls casting prismatic reflections across the medical bay windows. Inside, the standoff between Princess Thera's supporters and High Chancellor Roderick's forces had reached a critical point. The air itself seemed to vibrate with tension. "The Empress approaches," Roderick announced, his tone carrying both threat and desperation. "She will see this abomination for what it is, a corruption of everything we hold sacred." Thera's newly evolved form pulsed with calm confidence. "Will she, Chancellor? Or will she finally see the truth you've hidden from her for centuries?" Her transformed crystal matrix sparkled with patterns that seemed to draw light from the very air, creating mesmerizing displays that spoke of both power and possibility. Vivian monitored her instruments carefully. "Your Highness, your new form is stable, but there are still adjustments happening at the molecular level. We should." The medical bay doors burst open again, admitting a wave of Imperial guards whose crystal forms shimmered with all the colors of a nebula. They parted to reveal a figure that made everyone, even Roderick, bow deeply. Empress Lysandra of the Astrian Empire seemed to float rather than walk, her crystalline form a masterpiece of light and geometry. But unlike the rigid patterns of her court, her surface showed hints of flow and movement, subtle, but unmistakable to Vivian's trained eye. "Mother," Thera's voice was steady. "I trust you received my message." Along with some very interesting data from Dr. Reed, the Empress replied, her voice like wind through crystal caves. She turned to regard Vivian with eyes that seemed to hold entire galaxies. You have taken quite a risk, human, interfering in Astrian matters at this level. Vivian straightened her spine. With respect, Your Majesty, I'm a doctor first. My patient needed help. Everything else was secondary. A sound like distant chimes emanated from the Empress, perhaps a laugh? Indeed. She moved closer to Thura, studying her daughter's transformed state. The ancient resonance patterns. I haven't felt them so strongly since my own grandmother's time. She used to speak of our people's true nature, before the age of crystallization. Lies and legends, Rodrix interjected desperately. Your Majesty, surely you see this deviation cannot be allowed to. Silence. The Empress didn't raise her voice, but Rodrix's form actually cracked slightly at her command. I see many things, Chancellor. I see how my daughter's natural evolution frightened you. I see how you tried to use our own heritage as a weapon against her. And I see. She turned to face him fully, the same resonance patterns in your own form that were found in the toxin used against her. The medical bay erupted into chaos. Rodrix's guards moved to protect him, while Imperial forces surged forward. But before violence could erupt, Thura raised her hands, and that strange, ancient song filled the air again. Every crystalline being in the room froze, their forms resonating in response. We don't need violence, Thura said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to touch something deep within the Astrian psyche. We need truth. Mother, the changes happening to me, they're not unique. Across the Empire, our people have begun to evolve. The Chancellor and his supporters have been suppressing it, twisting our own ancient powers into weapons against change. The Empress nodded slowly. I have suspected as much for some time. But suspicion is not proof, and the Chancellor's influence runs deep. She turned to Vivian. Your research into my daughter's condition has provided that proof. The question now is, what do we do with this knowledge? Vivian stepped forward. If I may, Your Majesty. What's happening to your people isn't a corruption or a regression. It's evolution, a natural response to changing conditions in the galaxy. Fighting it has only caused pain and division. But embracing it. She gestured to Thura, look at what's possible when you work with change instead of against it. Heresy. Rodrix's voice shattered several nearby instruments. Our entire civilization is built on the stability of our crystalline forms. If we allow this chaos, everything we've built will collapse. Not collapse, Thura corrected. Transform. Like I have. She moved to the center of the room, her new form casting ever-changing patterns of light across the walls. Look at me, all of you. I am not lesser for having changed. I am not weaker for having evolved. I am both what we were and what we can become. To demonstrate, she lifted her hands, and the light around her began to dance. Solid objects seemed to waver, and for a moment, everyone in the room felt a connection to something vast and ancient, the primordial power that had birthed their species. This is what you feared, Chancellor, Thura said softly. Not that we would devolve, but that we would remember. Remember that we were never meant to be static crystals, but dynamic beings capable of incredible growth. The Empress moved to stand beside her daughter, and to everyone's shock, her own form began to shift subtly, revealing patterns that echoed Thura's evolution. I too have felt the call of change, daughter. I simply waited for someone brave enough to show the way. She turned to address the room at large. The Astrian Empire stands at a crossroads. We can cling to an artificial stability that requires us to suppress our own nature, or we can embrace a new path, one that honors both our past and our future. Rodrix made one last desperate attempt. The people will never accept this. The people are already changing, Nixus interrupted, stepping forward. Reports have been coming in from across the Empire, signs of evolution appearing in populations everywhere. The only thing your suppression has accomplished is to make them fear their own nature. A new sound filled the air, a harmony of crystalline tones as, one by one, members of both the Imperial Guard and Rodrix's own forces began to resonate with Thera's song. Their forms shifted slightly, revealing hints of the more fluid, dynamic patterns that had been hidden beneath centuries of rigid control. In that moment, everyone in the room understood that they were witnessing not just the resolution of a political crisis, but the birth of a new era for the Astrian Empire. And at its heart stood a human scientist who had dared to suggest that change was not something to be feared, but something to be embraced. But as Vivian watched the historic scene unfold, her scientific mind was already racing ahead to the implications. The Astrians were about to undergo a species-wide transformation. And if anyone tried to stop it, what had begun as a peaceful evolution might yet become something far more dramatic. The news spread across the Astrian Empire at faster-than-light speeds. Change was coming. In the days following the confrontation on Station Helios, crystalline beings throughout the Empire began to embrace their evolving nature. But not everyone welcomed this transformation. As Vivian had feared, there were those who would fight to maintain the old order, even if it meant civil war. 1 week after the revelation of Rodrix's betrayal, Station Helios had become the heart of what some were calling the evolution revolution. The medical bay had been transformed into a research center where Vivian worked alongside Astrian scientists, helping others undergo controlled transformations similar to Thera's. Another successful transformation, Vivian announced, watching as a young Astrian noble emerged from the resonance chamber, their form now shimmering with the same fluid patterns as Thera's. That makes 17 today. Princess Thera, who had refused to leave the station despite the growing crisis, moved to greet the newly transformed noble. Her own form had continued to evolve, becoming something that seemed to exist somewhere between crystal and pure energy. "Welcome to the dawn of our new age, cousin," she said warmly. The noble bowed, their new form resonating in harmony with hers. But the moment of celebration was interrupted by urgent alerts. Commander Nixis burst into the lab, his crystalline form pulsing with alarm. "Your Highness, Dr. Reed, we have a situation. Rodrix's supporters have seized control of the Stellar Forge." Vivian's blood ran cold. The Stellar Forge was the Astrian Empire's most closely guarded secret, a massive installation that could manipulate the very essence of crystal formation. "They're going to try to force everyone back to their old forms," she realized. Worse, Thera's voice was grim. "They could use it to shatter anyone who has already evolved. We have to stop them." The Empress, who had been overseeing operations from the station, stepped forward. "The forge is too well defended. Even with our new abilities, a direct assault would be suicide." "Then we don't assault it," Vivian said, an idea forming. "We change it, just like we changed ourselves." She moved to her console, pulling up schematics that the Empress had provided. "The forge works by broadcasting specific resonance patterns across space. If we can modify those patterns, we could use their own weapon to accelerate the evolution instead of reversing it," Thera finished, her form brightening with excitement. "But we'd need to get inside." "Leave that to me," Nixis said. "Not everyone in the military supports Rodrix. I know people inside the forge who will help." What followed was the most daring operation in Astrian history. While Rodrix's forces prepared to broadcast their suppression wave, a small team infiltrated the forge. Vivian, Thera, and a select group of evolved Astrians moved through its crystalline corridors, guided by Nixis's intelligence. They encountered resistance, of course. Rodrix himself was waiting in the forge's control center, surrounded by loyalists whose forms had been artificially hardened against evolution. "You're too late," he announced as they burst in. "The suppression wave is already charging. In moments, your aberrant evolution will be corrected, and order will be restored." But Vivian noticed something odd about his form, subtle cracks appearing, patterns shifting beneath the rigid surface. "You're evolving too," she realized. "Even now, you can't stop it completely. I am in control." Rodrix's voice shattered several nearby crystals. I will not let our civilization descend into chaos. Look at yourself. Thera stepped forward, her form radiating calm power. Look at what fighting change has done to you. You're literally breaking apart. Indeed, Rodrix's once perfect crystalline form was now webbed with fractures, the suppressed evolution fighting to break free. His loyalists watched in horror as their leader's form began to crumble. It's not chaos we bring, Thera continued, reaching out to him. It's harmony. The harmony of embracing who and what we truly are. She began to sing that ancient song again, but this time, Vivian recognized it wasn't just a song, it was a key, unlocking something buried deep in the Astrian genetic memory. One by one, Rodrix's supporters began to resonate with it, their artificially hardened forms softening, allowing the natural evolution to flow. Vivian rushed to the forge's controls. The suppression wave is about to fire. I can't stop it, but... Her fingers flew across the crystalline interface, implementing the modifications they had planned. I can change its frequency. Rodrix made one last desperate lunge for the controls, but his fragmenting form failed him. As he collapsed, the forge fired, sending a wave of energy cascading across Astrian space. But instead of suppressing evolution, it carried Thera's song, the key to unlocking the Astrians' true potential. Throughout the Empire, crystalline beings felt the wave pass through them. But instead of pain or regression, they experienced awakening. The rigid patterns of centuries began to flow like liquid starlight, transforming an entire civilization in a matter of moments. In the forge's control center, Rodrix watched as his own form finally surrendered to the change. The perfect, rigid crystal of his old self fell away, revealing something new and unexpected. I remember, he whispered. We were dancers among the stars once. Before we imprisoned ourselves in perfect crystal. And we can be again, Thera said gently. Not by forgetting what we became, but by embracing all that we are. The aftermath of what became known as the Resonance Revolution transformed not just the Astrians, but the balance of power in the galaxy. The Empire remained, but it was fundamentally changed, no longer a rigid hierarchy of unchanging crystal, but a dynamic civilization of beings who could shift between crystalline solidity and near-energy states at will. Station Helios became the center of a new era of human-Astrian cooperation. The medical bay where it all began was transformed into an institute dedicated to studying evolution and change throughout the galaxy. And at its heart worked a human scientist who had dared to suggest that sometimes, the most profound healing comes not from fighting change, but from embracing it. Years later, Vivian stood in that same medical bay, watching stars drift past the window. Behind her, Thera's form shimmered with ever-changing patterns of light. Do you ever regret it? The princess asked. Getting involved in our politics, changing the course of our history? Vivian smiled, turning to face her friend. I was just doing my job, helping a patient heal. Everything else. She gestured to the view of space, where crystalline ships now flew in formations that would have been impossible before the evolution. That was all you. Your courage to change, to become what you were meant to be. Thera's form chimed with amusement. Perhaps. But sometimes it takes an outsider to remind us of who we truly are. She moved to stand beside Vivian at the window. And who we might become. Together, they watched the stars, human and Astrian, while around them, the universe continued its eternal dance of evolution and change.